Okay, we'll get started with color. Still want to make sure everyone can hear me. If you stop hearing me, if I stop talking, go ahead and put something in the chat and I will try to fix it. So, this is the last chapter of the book. We technically have one more class period for for online session, which will be next Wednesday. And so, at the beginning of this, since I think we've got everyone here, put in the chat. There's there's a couple of things I could talk about next week. We could talk about portfolios. We could talk about the book that I like called Designing Your Life. Or we could talk about there's another book called Range that is the theory behind, or I would say the premise, or what would we call it? Yeah, the premise or the theory behind range is the more things that people are exposed to or try will increase the value of what you do next. So, for instance, in the book, the first the first example is, and this is kind of the theory that I went by until I read this book, was that if you spent 10,000 hours practicing something, you become a master. And the earlier you start at that, the more refined you're going to be. And though it's true for certain types of things like golf and chess, but then there's other things where a range of experiences will help people be better. And he uses some examples with, to start off with, he uses Tiger Woods and some chess masters versus a tennis player who was considered one of the best tennis players ever. And contrast those two, and especially because Tiger Woods and this tennis player were friends. It that's how he starts the book, and then he talks about some other things, but he ends up with an artist and explains why this is one of the greatest artists of all time because of how many diverse experiences this particular artist has. So there's that. Or we could talk about e-portfolios. So I've, I've kind of explained those things. So we've got Designing Your Life. We could talk about that book. We could talk about e-portfolios, or we could talk about range. Or if someone else has a suggestion that they want to discuss, we can throw that in there. So I should have maybe I should have created a poll or something. But so go ahead and put in the chat what you would like to, and if you want to like direct message me so you don't put it in the chat, you can do that too. If you want to just explain to me, um, what you would like to talk about next week. So we'll talk about the options I suggest, and I'm open to other options too. So we've got Designing Your Life. Who wants to talk about that next week? This is kind of like how to pick your path or your career going forward. Any votes for that one? So we've got one for Designing Your Life. And then Dayton's voting with me. Anything I want to talk about, David's up for that. I mean, sorry, Dayton's up for that. Let's see. So then there's range. And Any votes for range? The book Range by David Epstein. One vote for Range. And then the other one was ePortfolios. And then do you have something else you want to talk about? How about since we only got two votes from the people that are here, and because Dayton said that we can kind of go anyway, I'll divide it up between range and designing your life, and because those they actually can go together. So we'll talk about those things next week. Okay. Yeah, I'll combine those two next week. We'll start out with we'll actually start out with range, just so you can get the idea of what some of the stories in there that are fun, and then we'll talk about how that is would be relevant to designing your life. So so now on to color. So some of you have worked on uh, the a color presentation, and what's interesting with is color is a lot more of a cultural, um, I would say, a cultural phenomenon than it is a scientific phenomenon. There are certain things like the color of blood is going to do certain things. I mean, is going to have some strong feelings. I think to most people in most cultures, the color of blood, if you associate it with that, but other cultures use red um, to show or symbolize different things. For instance, if you are from, and I know this is in China, but I think probably everywhere in Asia, a red letter is something that you're hoping you're going to get in China. So red letter is like a happy thing because that usually comes with money at the new year. So my daughter, one of my daughters spent some time in Taiwan, and so it's always kind of a fun thing that we talk about. Sometimes I give her red letters at the Chinese New Year. So it just depends on, a lot of times color has to do with culture, just as we talk about colors here. This book focuses more on color in the, I would say, the American version of color. And so, oh, and something else that I just wanted to throw in is, as we talk about this color theory, so here's the color spectrum, and this is the color spectrum that we can see as humans. There is this other animal. There's this other animal called the mantis shrimp, which is fascinating because we have basically three different color receptors in our eyes that can see colors and shades and things like this. But this mantis shrimp has 12. And so, and this mantis shrimp thing is also crazy because its punch, they said, can get water. I don't think this is I don't think this is true because it doesn't say it on Wikipedia, but it does. If you watch, there's a video out here, and I queued it up, but it's not going, from this video from National Geographic, said that when it's got these claws in front that it can punch with, and it can punch really fast. And so they explain here that it gets just in like an instant, these claws get going like 50 miles an hour, and it would be the equivalent to shooting a 22 caliber bullet. These little claws. So it's got all these superpowers, but it's interesting, and the only reason I bring this up is because it has these 12 color receptors that it's got in its eyes, and so it can actually see a bigger spectrum than we can. So this is the spectrum that we can see, and this is if you hit a so if you shoot a white light through a prism, these are the different colors you're going to get. Oh yeah, Dayton's seen these things too. And another thing is like if you're trying to handle one and they flip their little claws out there, you're gonna get hurt. So yeah, crazy powerful those little things. But it's interesting that they can see a bigger spectrum of light than what we're showing here is a spectrum. And so just interesting because another interesting I've heard that people with near death experiences come back and say wherever they go and what they see, they say they can see more colors, which I think is an interesting concept because we do know that there's more spectrum out there that we can't see. Just just as we're talking about color in this spectrum. So, and what's interesting is we have two different types of color systems. We've got the light system and then we've got like pigment system. So there's the additive system, and so you add things together, but then there's a subtractive system where you take things away and it changes the color. So what's interesting with light is a combination of all colors combined to make white. Where with and this is they're calling this the additive process. But if you with pigments, it is taking colors away to get white. So which is an interesting concept in itself that we have those two different color systems um, that we're talking about. And what's interesting here is that we look at these two, our perception of color is affected by the colors around it. Because this color and the same as I mean, the two smaller squares are the same, but they do look different depending on which colors surround them. And then we've got the properties of color, which are hue, and then the color spectrum. This is the color, and we've got the color wheel here. And there's so many different versions of this color wheel, but we've got the primary colors, which are red, green, and blue. And then the secondary colors are these colors in between as you mix these different colors or with light as you subtract the different colors. And then you've got tertiary colors, which are the direct opposites of the color above or straight across on these color wheels. And you'll see all kinds of versions. And then we talked about value last week. And so you can see that it's interesting to see the different brightnesses of these colors depending on what their value is. So we've got the grayscale here in the middle with the value of this blue. As it goes down, it fades away, but it's interesting how, and it seems to be brighter on the right, and the yellow is brighter on the left. So and here it says the color seems to change value depending on what's surrounding it. And then here's intensity, where these are the same color red. It's just more of it is on one side than the other, or closer together, however you want to say that. So it's interesting. This is a web form color picker, and we've got the red, green, and blue version. It's funny. This is one from Adobe Systems, and they've taken away the only web colors because there used to be less colors on monitors, but they've gone away from that. But as a designer, you need to understand these different color palettes and how they work. So with cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, this is you need to understand how like this certain color, and some of you may have done it where it looks pretty good on the screen, but then when you print it, it doesn't look so good. And then you have to lighten it up or adjust colors to make what you see on the screen to what is printed. And a lot of that has to do with how well the monitor is calibrated or the TV or whatever you're using. Macintosh does a really good job with their monitors of having colors be having colors work. Now it's an interesting if you work with paint, and I've worked with sub sorry screen printing throughout my career quite a bit, and it's interesting what different blacks and whites will add to or what effects those will have to colors. And then I've also done ceramics, and with glaze it's just interesting what happens with glazes at high temperatures or at different temperatures to get different colors to happen. And so there's all these different palettes of color out there depending on what you're going to do. The red, green, blue, and the CMYK is quite a bit easier than trying to get something done with either in with screen printing paint. And it doesn't work really well with if you've done acrylics or oil. You'll see those same things where it's kind of hard to figure out what color you want or what color you're going to get when you mix certain things. A lot of experimentation, but if you go with printing or with with TV graphics or monitor or what you're going to see on the web, it's a, it's easier to deal with those colors. Here's some more with paint. This is the one that talks about. What's interesting is this pointillism. And it's too bad that we can't get it closer on this to see. We can kind of make it. If we're using points with color, it's interesting is as we get closer to this to see as we pull that back. To see how that looks. And what's interesting with monitors and TV and like giant big screens, they're just doing that same. They're having they're just having little clusters of lights together that do the different colors. But as we pull back from them, we see different colors come across. And it's interesting they talk about cool and warm colors. And there's lots of theories about how different colors affect us. What's interesting here is they're making this look, they're saying this is a cool color because they've got snow in here. And I'm wondering if the snow has more of an effect because you could take these same type of blue colors in the summer and paint it at an evening and maybe get some of the same colors, but because it's in a different painted at a different time of the year, would get a different effect even though they were blue. And here we're just showing that if you're designing something and you throw in something that's really different, our eyes will tend to uh, go towards that. Here they're talking about balance, how we can use different colors to balance. How we can balance our design by spreading different colors out across a design. Just seeing that we're seeing the value here, but it does it does I think bring more balance to this design right here. Here's a good example of using color up in the foreground, showing things darker, and then showing things lighter farther away. It's also helping us to know what time of the day it is. It's interesting here in this where the lack of color is showing it's night. And this one, it would be interesting to talk to the person who created this Navajo blanket and why they chose the colors that they did. Does it have some kind of religious type meaning? Is it just practical because these are the colors that they could get a hold of? Or is there some other meaning that we're not even understanding? Here we're talking about triadic complementary color scheme where they're using complementary colors in here, but they're just using basically three colors to create the whole. And then this is more of a complementary colors to try to elicit some more. And then back to this painting that we see all the time. And they're saying this is a triadic color. They've really got they've got three different colors going on here. And this is just contrast. So this they call it color discord, where you've got these are colors that are opposed on the opposite ends of this color wheel. What's interesting is in the United States in Christmas we've got red and green, which are kind of this discordant colors. They just go along with us, but I think it's interesting that we've got the red and green in Christmas. That in a lot of ways elicits more emotion with when we've got these complementary or sorry, discordant colors. So these discordant colors with the higher contrast. And this emotional color idea, I think this is more cultural than anything else. And some of these things I think are maybe if our ideas about color are affected by what artists have done and what their subjects. So Picasso went through this blue period. So everybody I think they just assume he was depressed with and so people have just started using blue to show the depression. So it's interesting here that this artist is using the red and green to show, I would say, some type of revolution, mercenaries, to show a lot of emotion with these contrasting colors. And it's interesting where we've got these sayings, true blue, caught him red-handed, little white lie, and how we say you're too yellow to do it, which is supposed to be cowardly. And I haven't actually done any research to find out kind of where those things have come from, but they're still Yeah, so here it's interesting. It's talking about what does a bride wear. White is what we say, but yellow is the choice in India and red is the choice in China. Interesting. I lived in South Carolina for a few years, and since this is Easter week, these the Christian churches would have crosses out in front of them. And I saw this in Florida too, but I don't see it here as much. But the Christian churches would have a cross, and then on different days of the week, they would hang up different um, colors of cloth. And so towards the end of the week, they would hang up a purple cloth, which I think is symbolizes Christ's um, torture and persecution. But then usually on Easter Sunday, they would change that cloth color to white, for that he had like overcome his oppression and he was resurrected. So I just think it's interesting that the Christian symbols have picked that up. And if you have an opportunity to go past a Christian church this week and they've got a cross, you may see this color cloth draped over that. And so that's some of the symbolism that we may see this week. Here we're using white and black and red. And there's the Swiss flag there in the, and I'm going to get my Google Translate out here just to see what that says. Oh, this is interesting. This one says the sky over Switzerland is big enough. Um, there's no tolerance for minerals. So I'm guessing that this is a um, clean air type policy, but it's just showing let's keep the environment. I mean, this is an environmental message here. It's kind of fun. So that is it for the book. We are so we could we could probably have a whole class, and I imagine if you go on to get your master's in art, you will probably have a class that just talks about color. So many theories and ideas about color. Fascinating to see how different people perceive different colors. But as an artist, as a designer, we need to understand how our audience will interpret the colors. So that's one of the reasons that we all need to or keep exploring this idea of color. So I think that's it. Next week we'll jump in. Hopefully we'll have some useful information information that will be useful to you. And then that will be, so we're getting close to the end of the class. There's also one thing that they've added in the last couple of years is I shouldn't say the last couple of years, it's been the last 2 semesters. They've added in an assignment, this extra credit assignment. Visit at least two. So So this is visiting different art like galleries. You can go to free galleries. There's galleries all over the place, but then there is the Museum of Fine Arts. But there's a lot of places that have art if you're familiar with some of the art from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, you can go to the conference center and see some original artworks there. So this is a form of extra credit. You can do this to go to galleries. This is something that I think is fun to see different perspectives as I've gone through different museums. This is something that I've done with my children fairly often, and it's fun to when they see a famous work of art that they've seen in a gallery, they have a good time with that. So this is it for today. If you've got any questions, you can stick around. Otherwise, thanks for joining, and we will see you all next week.